Thank you very much. I'll just welcome B. Perez, Chief Sustainability Officer of the Coca-Cola Company, who will introduce the next session. And of course, we are moving toward, and then to the final session after this one, where His Excellency Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya, and Helene Gayle will comment and respond to everything from today. This session and the next one should prove to be very rewarding and very helpful to all of us. So with that, welcome B. Perez.
Thank you, Wayne. Let's see, is this on? Can you guys hear me okay? All right, perfect. So we decided that we want to save a lot of time at the end for questions. So we're going to get right into a few opening remarks. Each one of us will do that, and then brief questions amongst the panelists, and then we're going to open it right up to the floor. What's been interesting is thinking about just the sheer opportunity in Africa. I had someone in my office dig out a statistic because I wanted to make sure I had this right. But if you took the United States, Europe, and China, in terms of land mass, you can fit all those countries right into Africa. That's enormous. The other thing that's really interesting, just playing right off of what John Rice was saying, in terms of mobile technology, so out of the top 20 countries that deal in mobile payments, Africa has 15 out of the top 20. It's actually easier to pay for a taxi with your mobile phone in Nairobi than it is in New York. So those are some really interesting facts, because if you think about Africa, the opportunity is so great, yet the need is so strong. Because you also heard the opening remarks, if you were here today, around poverty, hunger, and what's facing the country, or multiple countries, because Africa, as you know, is made up of 54 countries. Is it 54 or 56? 54. So it's incredible, because one size does not fit all. So there's multiple approaches. I'm proud to be at Coca-Cola because we've been in Africa for 85 years already. And we're the largest consumer goods company in Africa, employing 70,000 people. In addition to that, since 2001, we've invested $8 billion, and we plan to invest another $10 billion by 2020. So we're committed, but we know that we can't do it alone, because with the size of the opportunity, it has to be done in partnership. And our CEO, Muhtar Kent, always talks about something he calls the Golden Triangle. And I thought, before I introduced my panelists, last night we had a conversation, and we decided the Golden Triangle, which is public-private partnerships, NGOs all working together, has to start with civil society right at the center, and has to really go into each local community and understand and address the needs. And so at Coca-Cola, we do focus on 3 top global priorities, which we've brought into the local marketplace, starting with that community need and talking to the individuals. Water, you heard Senator Isakson earlier today talk about some of the programs we have around water. We have a program called Replenish Africa Initiative that will replenish water to 2 million Africans by 2015. We have a program to empower 5 million women by 2020. Today, out of the total 5 million globally, over 230,000 come directly from Africa, 15 countries within Africa. And then around well-being, you heard the whole conversation today is around this holistic approach around health. Getting vaccines out to populations in rural areas is critical. So working with the Global Fund and other organizations, we've been able to take 500 distribution centers for vaccines up to 5,500 in the last couple years. But not done alone. It's been done through Gates Foundation, USAID, the local governments, and the list goes on. So with that, we plan today to discuss how partnership happens, some of the key learnings, and drill it specifically into the agricultural sector, because as we know, the dire need to feed the world's population is critical. And in Africa, the resources are so great, yet also so thin, on the other hand. And so with that, we have 2 spectacular panelists up here today that join us. I'll first introduce Dean Scott Engel. He's the Dean of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences over at UGA, so thank you for joining us here today. And if you look in your bio, you'll actually be able to read more information. I have to say, I didn't say this to him last night, but I also went to University of Maryland, so thank you for your work there as well. And then we also have Nuruddin Osman, who's the head of Africa and Middle Eastern operations for AGCO. And he has a spectacular story to tell. So what I'd like to do is first run the video that he brought to us to share, And then from there, he'll go directly into a few comments before we move into the panel discussion and ask the Dean to have his comments after Nuruddin.
Thank you.
In Africa today, one of the greatest challenges to developing African agriculture is how to engage and excite the youth in the agricultural industry. At the moment, there's huge levels of unemployment amongst young people, and unfortunately many of them don't really see agriculture as a viable career opportunity for them. The challenge for companies like AGCO is how we really bridge that gap. How do we bring young people into this industry? And I think the key for us is training and education needs to be the basis of which we work with young people. On the ground at the Future Farm in Zambia, we're already training young African men and women to be the next generation, and it's really great to see them understanding the equipment, learning how to use it in the field and taking that innovation out into the wider community. So we've just had our first harvest on the Zambia Future Farm, and we've been really pleased to be able to take the proceeds of that harvest and invest that really in the local community, again addressing and supporting young people and rural development. Another really important feature of the Future Farm concept is working in partnerships, and we're really pleased to be working in partnership with Bayer Crop Science on supporting another really interesting initiative of working with young people in a sustainable way. The project is working with Africa 4-H Council, which is an international NGO that focuses on rural youth development. We're working with them very specifically on a project at the Future Farm, and the idea is to work with young people and train them on basic agronomy and really how to make money out of agriculture.
I think it's very important for our corporations or companies like ALCO to work with other partners like 4H and other people in the non-profit, because each non-profit brings its own expertise and experience which you may not have, but you also have the experience and expertise that they don't have. And if we want to reach the young people, we need to work together, put together our strength and experiences for the improvement of young people.
For AGCO, supporting young people is supporting agribusiness in Africa.
Good afternoon. I saw a lot of academics in the audience today, so I need to warn you, I speak most widely spoken language in the world, which is broken English. So be patient with me on that. As ECHO, I joined 9 years ago, and ECHO launched its strategy 10 years ago. ECHO has been in Africa more than 100 years. One of the things I learned from this 9 years work in UK, work in Brazil, work in the US, I found agriculture is very successful. And every time I went out and met people and tell them I work for ECHO in the rural area, US or in Brazil or somewhere, people were interested. They wanted to know me. They wanted to get my name, especially the ladies who want to get my number. But so with that vision, I went to Africa. So I said, I'm the director for Africa and Middle East. Most of the people literally say to me, I feel sorry for you. That's the difference. The challenge we face in Africa. Agriculture is not seen as a business. Agriculture is development. I'm not criticizing civil society, but civil society plays a critical role. As you can see, we work very closely with the civil society. But agriculture is not seen as a business. Agriculture is seen as an aid, as a development, and significant funding at spending on that side. So our job as an ECHO is how do we get make it agriculture sexy, to be honest, just to bring it into one word. How do we get agriculture seen as entrepreneurship, that people can really build a livelihood and develop their life? If you think about it, if you think about health, where does it start? It starts nutrition. You know, when you visit a doctor, advise you eat right, eat vegetables. So if there's no food, when we have a lot of places in Africa, then it's a challenge to develop anything. You know, we say in Africa, in an ocean, I can tell you that, there's no farm. So how many can answer that question? In Africa, we say no nation. So I repeat, no farm. I don't hear anybody saying no nation. So no farm, no nation. So the notion is you can develop a nation without having a secure food, secure, available something to eat. And to keep the food prices low, it's a challenge. Take it back in 2008, when with the prices, commodity prices, globally, the food prices went up. You know, inflation in the food prices in Africa went over 300%. Immediately, you've got riots. Your riots everywhere, Senegal, Egypt. So it is actually linked to security in Africa. Prosperity in Africa is very linked to the price of commodity or price of food. So if we can produce effectively, cost-effective way in Africa, then we can solve a lot of issues that African community today is facing. And tell you a little bit about the statistics. 60% world arable remaining land is in Africa. So Africa can play a critical role feeding the world. So population is growing. Soon will be 9 billion people in the world. Africa could play a critical role to solve food crisis in the world. I think it's time for agriculture. It's time to promote agriculture. It's seen as a business. It's not a development. It's not an aid. And if you take, for example, our colleagues are here for the poultry side, 40% global trade poultry takes place in Africa. You know, poultry is the cheapest form of protein. So how do we get access to protein is a challenge. You know, demand for eggs in Africa is huge. It's 1,000,000%. Per capita in Africa, it's 32 eggs per annum. And World Health Organization recommends 189 eggs per person per annum. So how do we really address protein production? Protein production comes from the feed. The challenge is the cost of feed is very high. You know, if you look at average yields per hectare in Africa, you know, especially for the family farmers, it's about 300 kg. You know, on average, we have achieved what you saw in the video is 8 tons. We achieved the first year. We're not farmers. We decided to go into farming to attract young people to get interested in agriculture. This is a training center. We bought 350 hectares last year in October in Zambia to build latest technology in agriculture farming. So our vision is high-tech solutions, professional farmers feeding the world. And that's what I want to implement in Africa. I stop here.
Yes, we'd love to get the academic perspective from Dean Engel as well. We'd love your view on what's happening in agriculture.
Well, thank you. And in fact, I'd love to follow up on one of your comments. I spent a lot of my time recruiting students to study agriculture in Georgia from the United States and indeed from the rest of the world. And the answer I get back is always the same. Why would I want to be in agriculture? It's part of development, low-paid jobs, hard lifestyle. Problem is that so much of that is not true, and we need to continue to tell the message that agriculture is more agribusiness than it is working directly on the farm. In my state, only 5% of our students will actually ever go back to a farm. The other 95% are going to work in some aspect of agribusiness, and that's a challenge that we have here in Georgia, but it's a challenge that we have around the rest of the world, particularly in Africa. As I recruit students here in Georgia, again, they are not familiar with that lifestyle. If I'm recruiting out of the African American community, for instance, where I've convinced a young person to come into the College of Agriculture, they go home and they tell their parent they're going to study in agriculture. And because of the history, they say, oh, no, you're not. Yeah. So we've got plenty of challenges, both in our country,
around the world. Sometimes there are different reasons, but the end result is that we have a lack of bright, motivated young people moving into this great industry. It is the largest industry on this planet, and while all these people want to help, they've got grand vision, they've got the abilities to do that, but they never see agriculture as an area that they can get into to make this world a better place. I want to talk about partnerships, and particularly from the perspective of universities and how I've seen that play out in Africa recently. Indeed, as all of you know, health and agriculture are intricately related to one another. Exposure to disease, malnutrition presupposes individuals to diseases like, exposure to HIV and malaria, not to mention all the food safety concerns of what we eat. I've seen, and you've all heard these stories before, I've been at feeding centers where you hear the story of the woman who just carried one of her children to the feeding center, but she had 2 children. She had to make a decision about which one to bring, because she was not strong enough because of hunger, because of disease, to carry 2 of her children to that feeding center. I heard last night, and I know this to be a fact as well, when people are hungry, there is more political unrest. There are some basic needs of human society. Food is one of the very first ones, and if your stomach is not full, you then are looking for any way and anything you can do to take care of yourself and your family. But mostly I want to talk about universities and how they can play into this, because that is part of the partnership. And let me begin by telling a story which will set this up for you. I lived in Egypt for a year, had a chance to work with many fine scientists. I was at a relatively well-known university there. Soon after I arrived as a soil scientist, I needed to go collect some soil. So a couple of my colleagues got in the car. We drove out to a particular area where these soils were located. And I start to get out of the car, and they go, no, you don't get out of the car. That's not your job. And I look around, and there's a pickup truck behind me with a bunch of guys in it, and they all jump out, and they roll the window down about this far and go, over there, over there. Someone runs over and starts digging the soil. They throw it in bags, and we take it back. And that really allowed me to appreciate the fact that if you don't get out of that car, and I'm using a bit of an analogy here, but if you don't get out of that car, you're going to miss an awful lot of important things for that society. You need to see how the roots are interacting with the soil, and you need to see how that soil has developed from the top horizon down to a meter or so. And you need to see if the soil is wet or dry, and how deeply that water is percolating. You can learn a lot about the problems of that region just by looking at the soil. But even more importantly, when you get out of that vehicle, people will tend to congregate around to watch what you're doing, and you start talking to the farmers. What are your problems? What do you need us to be doing for you? How can we help? And in many of these countries, they still look at the government as actually there to help, and so they're very appreciative when anyone comes to provide them any service at all. But if you don't get out of that car again, you will never know what those problems are. So there's a tremendous disconnect, and one of the things I've seen, and not all, but most African universities, is that they have established themselves as ivory towers. Some of them are very good trained scientists, they are good teachers, but the number one goal in many of these cultures is to get into that ivory tower, then lock the door as soon as you are up there and try to keep as many people out as possible. And that really creates a disconnect with the great intellectual capacity of that institution, and many of these are tremendous in solving the problems of society. So whether it's a College of Agriculture or a medical plan, or medical school, if you're not out there working with the population that needs help, talking to them, finding out what their problems are, you're not going to be able to do the work that is so important to them. Give you another example. I was in Gabon just a couple months ago, and many heads of state in Africa right now understand that not producing food is bad public policy. There are There are many, many countries where, whether lack of resources or in some cases too many resources like Gabon, where they can simply buy all their food, they've not felt it necessary to produce any food. So Gabon buys almost 92% of all of its food from other countries, and the president has realized that this is bad public policy for lots and lots of reasons. And so that president and many, many others are now developing programs, and they've all got 2025, 2030 type programs to make themselves self-sustainable in food production by that time. It's not always a good idea. Sometimes it is better to buy all of your food from a country, and if you can make shoes or computer screens more cheaply, sell those overseas and then use that income to buy your food, that may be the best system. But politically, socially, and internally for these individuals, they know that they've got to be able to produce more of their own food. So in Gabon, for example, they've been talking about sequencing the genome of cotton and corn. That's important work. It's going to make some great advances as in our ability to produce more cotton and corn around the planet, but they don't need to be doing that in Gabon. They need to be testing what rates of fertilizer should be applied to cotton to maximize yield. They're not going to compete with the US and Europe and Australia and some in Brazil and China now in sequencing some of these important crop species. Again, they need to be doing what is important for their country, but they're not always sure what that is because they've lost that touch. In Mali, where several of us in here have worked extensively, I would also echo your comments that the need for more poultry production is critical on the African continent. That's the best way, the #1 way to produce much needed protein on this continent. It's not all vertically integrated production like we would see in this country, although a lot more of that is needed. It's not all more backyard flocks like you would see in Africa. It's going to be both. But there are ways that they can help themselves in enhancing both their ability to produce vertically integrated chickens and backyard flocks. They don't need to be sequencing the genes of things like Newcastle disease virus that's devastating to chickens in Africa. About half the chickens die before they can come to full maturity. But that's not what is needed. There are many, many other much more simple yet critically needed issues to be worked on in that part of the world. This ivory tower, it's existed here in the United States. It's probably existed everywhere in the world. Back before the Civil War in the US, as probably all of you know, education was for in what we in the South called the landed gentry. These are people who had lots of money, didn't necessarily work. They went to institutions of higher education, the University of Georgia being one of them, as the oldest public university in the country. And you studied the classics, and you studied history, and you studied language, and you studied music. Things that are all important, but we're not going to move society forward. During the Civil War, there was a realization that as our country grows, this just is not going to work. We need to be training people at the collegiate level for education, and research in those areas that will have a dramatic impact upon our society. And so the Morrill Act, which some of you may have heard about, which was Justin Morrill, wrote the act. It was signed by Abraham Lincoln of 1862. It created the land grant system in the United States to study agricultural arts, the industrial arts, and the military arts. And from that have evolved the modern education. But the main point of that was that it began to train people to get out into society to solve real-world problems. But even here in the U.S., one of the things that we lacked, at least in the late 1850 to about 1900, was we realized we were doing lots of good research, but we weren't getting that information out to the people who need it. That's the situation that so many of these universities are in today in Africa. And so there was another act of Congress. It happened to be in 1914. Just last week was the 100th anniversary of the Cooperative Extension Service. And this was a program to take the information from universities and through essentially adult education, get it out to the people who needed it. The Morrill Act of the 1860s Smith-Lever Act, which created the Extension Service, is generally accepted as the reason why American agriculture is what it is today, because of our ability to solve problems and then get those solutions out to the people who need it. And in my opinion, of having worked in Africa for decades now, I think that is exactly the position that many of these universities are in. They need to get the information out to the people who need it, and they need to be talking to people in the country who have problems that the researchers at those universities can solve. Allow them to solve their own problems in Africa. We've got some great solutions here, but as we've heard over and over again this morning, our solutions will often not work in Africa and vice versa. And so we need to encourage institutions of higher education in Africa to move forward, to break down these ivory towers, to get people out into the communities, to close the cycle of information. And with that, just like we did in the United States, I'm convinced that many of these problems can be solved.
Thank you. So I think we've heard a couple of things here is that, one, agriculture has a branding problem. We need to make agriculture cool because it is something that is linked to a lot of other issues. And you know, water being dear and near to probably everyone's heart in this room, we know that agriculture uses 70% of the world's available water. So how do we think about agriculture in light of all the connected issues? In addition to that, it's highly complex. It's not one particular solution that can make this work. There's multiple solutions that have to come together and multiple partners. So tell us, both of you, maybe if you just go down the line, where have you seen it work the best? Have you seen one of the best partnerships that you say, that's effective, I would replicate this? Or what are some of the lessons learned where you say, avoid this kind of a relationship?
That's a very good question. Agriculture is the whole value chain. You know, the product that we produce touches a lot of different areas. And the areas that touches like crop establishment, crop nutrition. So we have to go out and work with the companies that produce, like for example, seed companies. So we work very closely, Zimbabwean company, and it works very well for us because they understand the local conditions, what kind of seed is needed. We work closely also Bayer Crop Science, as we mentioned in the video, and 4-H. 4-H is focusing on very young age of agriculture training. One of the best thing is in partnership works when you have private, public, and people partnership. So there's 4 Ps. If you don't bring to the people and the local community involved in all the activities you're undertaking in Africa, then you lose. You will be branded immediately land grabber. So it is very important to think about the community living in the land. Land is very traditional. It's not something that Africans would like to give up. So it's really important part of the community. So you have to engage the local community getting involved. Give you an example. When we acquired our farm, we were told there are 70 people living in the farm and 37 employees that we took over from the farm, previous owners. And when we started the farm, we organized barbecue, get the whole community together. 110 kids showed up for the barbecue. We thought there were 70 people living in the farm. The farm is completely ring-fenced. And then we organized the second one, again 110 kids showed up. We thought they invited the neighbors. So we did a little bit of research in the farm, how many people living there. 189 people live there. And we've actually asked 37 employees, have 110 kids. You know, so you have to change the approach that you can give a blank check or just pay a bill or salary, an employee, everything will be fine. You have to think, how do I get the kids involved, all the activities? How do I build infrastructure for housing? How do you provide running water? How do I think electricity? Getting into the community. So we're actually building new facilities for the community, and all the proceeds that we bring the farm goes back to the community. So when we started the 4-H project, that was our first harvest. It was 10 hectares, and went 100% back to the local community. So we continue to cultivate more land. We've cultivated this year 50 hectares. And we hope the proceed for the harvesting this year, which is this week and the next couple of weeks, to again invest back to the community. So you have to really bring the community along. They own it. You know, you can leave your wallet in the farm, you can walk, it's safe, you have no issue. They protect you. You are part of the community. You are not just coming there just to take resources out of the continent. You are part of the solution. You're trying to be, we're building that this is a training center. For us, the benefit is we can train our own dealers. We have 37 countries in Africa represented. We have been 100 years in Africa. So we have to train our dealer staff. We have to train our own distributors, their staff. And we use this facility to train them. And it's a win-win situation. And we bring along with the local community to work with us and also learn. What we found is the community learns very quickly the high tech. The more sophisticated, the quicker they can adapt the technology. It's similar to the mobile technology. Today, agriculture is the same. You can have your mobile involved, you can check the weather, you can see your map where you can know where your asset is all the time. So that technology is really fits in within a local community. And the partnership that works is when you involve the local community. You have to listen, you have to talk to them, you have to go out. Our strategy is based on voice of customer. We talk to more than 400,000 farmers and ask them what do they want. The only thing they've told us, when we summarize it, is we just want service. Don't do magical things. Just provide that service and provide it a one-stop shop, and then we will buy your product. That was the answer from the farmers. And we are trying now to focus to provide that service to the farmers so that we can support them, the growth. And if you jump from 1 hectare, 1 ton hectare, and you jump to 8 ton, imagine how much growth in there. In terms of income. From $150 ton, you can now jump on quite significantly to make more money. So we're focusing how to get every hectare maximum yields possible, using technology, latest technology, and really providing service to the farmers. One thing that doesn't work for me, our side, and we've had 2 studies, and we have a case in Ethiopia, we have a case in Morocco, when you have 2 public involved. So the 3-4 Ps, you could have a donor country supporting the receiving country. You have 2 public involved. So you have the US government donating funds or supporting in the projects, and then you have a receiving country. When there are 2 projects, we have to donate the project. It's not sustainable. It's just the US government demands you have to be, accountability, where they bring their own consultants, and they bring the 100 people implementing the project, and then hold on, this is agriculture. We provide this service free charge. We're not in the hope that the customers will buy our product 3-4 years down the road. But now you're bringing your own consultants. No, we have to make sure the taxpayers are well paid, documented. So you end up just filling the forms when you have 2 publics. You just end up just walk away. We've seen that in Ethiopia, we've seen that in Morocco, where we donated in kind our equipment and said, this is not going to work. After 3 years trying it, and we say, let's walk out. The only public-private partnership will work when you have one public. When you have African country, private sector, civil society, and the people, local community involved, it will work, 100%. But 2 donor receiving, private is too much.
It sounds like that's right in line with what the dean said over here, which is it's agribusiness, not just agriculture, correct? Yeah. So what would be some of your thoughts along the same lines?
Well, let me, again, follow up on the 4-H example. Georgia's got the leading 4-H program in the country. It's a powerful system for training youth. But it started as what was called the Corn Club back in the almost 100 years ago now. And the idea is that corn yields at that time were about 1/10 what they are today. We knew we had a lot of good technology to improve yields, but we were not making good progress with many of the adult farmers. And so the concept was, let's train the young people how to grow corn. They were all given small corn plots. They would double, they would triple the yields of their fathers. They would take that home and show their fathers what they have done, and then that knowledge became incorporated into the more collective production system. So it was a very good model that has helped youth understand the importance of agriculture, but it's never an easy argument, it's never an easy message, and I think it's something all of us need to continue to work on. I also want to mention something a little more about vertical integration into the poultry industry. Vertical integration is it's a concept that I think has great implications for the continent of Africa. Gates, other NGOs now are using a model where they will go into a village and not just solve malaria or not just grow more food. The idea is you need to fix all the problems of that particular village, because in soil science we have something called Liebig's law of the minimum. The result of that activity will only rise as high as the least effective component of that system. And so you can fix all the problems of the village, but if you still have malaria, or if you fix malaria and you still have hungry people, the system will fall to that lowest level. And so vertical integration is a concept that in a continent where many of these industries remain disconnected from one another would force the connections that would assure that we are, let's take the case of poultry, that the young chicks are being hatched in Africa rather than being bought from France and transferring that wealth to another country. The equipment to grow out these young chickens can be produced and constructed in Africa rather than being sent to other countries of the world. The feed can be produced in Africa, capture that value, and then the chickens ultimately are sold into the continent as well. So currently in Africa, we're losing much of the value chain of poultry because we're sending those funds to all sorts of countries around the world. It would be a very easy scenario to see how we could connect these together and capture the entire value. So finding ways for industries to work together and to connect, which I think was one of the main messages from, I thought that last great speech from General Electric, is just so important. Poultry has been a good example of how that can happen. I think other industries are just ripe for that type of scenario.
Yeah, so while we're going to ask some folks to line up now for questions, and while people are lining up and thinking through their questions, I'm going to segue into two other connected topics. So we've heard a lot today around educating women, educating men as well. We know around women's economic empowerment, there's many of the farmers that happen to be women.
Yes.
And so I think that that's really important. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on specific to women farmers. And then the second one, to give you a little bit of time to think about it, either one of you can take this. Last week in the New York Times, there was an article around the growing concern of food waste. Today we waste 1/3 of all food that's produced for human consumption, 1/3. So we know that while we're struggling to feed the world's population, on the other hand, we're also wasting a lot of food, which contributes to everything from, the food waste that's in landfills, which is 33% of the emissions that are in the air, creating some of the pollution we discussed earlier. It's a drain on the water resources. And so I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on women's empowerment around farming as well as food waste. And then would love for some folks to line up and get some questions in as well.
Let me start the food waste. When you think about the food waste, in Africa, we lose the post-harvesting loss. That's where the biggest loss takes place. It doesn't mean that Africa loses too much food, but you also have to see the developed countries. They lose a lot of food when it's cooked after. So we are actually building in our as Dean said, we're building the whole value chain in our farm. We're building the first training center for grain handling, grain storage, state-of-the-art handling that. And we're also building the first poultry learning center. It's not that we discussed about what we're doing in our farm, but that will be a huge investment for us for the long term. And hopefully to complete this project by April next year, we'll be open for public from April onwards. It's a big challenge for the grain storage in Africa. Lack of storage facilities, especially for if you take the corn, moisture content is about 50%, and it requires quick fixing and quick storage, and that's where ACO has invested 2 years ago, $1 billion acquisition in GSI. GSI is a U.S. company based, so we're hoping to expand this product into the African market. Coming back to the women, in agriculture, you just have to drive in the rural area. What I love about my job is when I travel to Africa, I'm privileged to travel 27 countries last 3 years in Africa. And you drive into the rural area and you find only women in the field. Man is just sitting there in the village or in their motor, not doing anything. Sometimes I wonder, why don't they go back and help? Maybe the grandmother is still working in the field. When you talk to the women, they're very expert in agriculture. They absolutely know what they're doing. They grow their own seeds, they replant again, and they're very good and financially very strong. And that's where we have to really address how do we help the women to make their life easier working in the field.
Yes.
And how do we really take people out of the field? Because, maybe I'm biased, but if we mechanize in Africa, there will be a lot of lost jobs in the field. But the benefit of that is you can create constant supply into the processing side. The challenge is there is a lot of processing factories in Africa, poultry, abattoirs, but they're running 10%, 20% of the capacity. Lack of constant supply. So mechanization will help the women move out of this difficult job, the punishment job working in the field, move into the little bit more easier jobs in the processing side, packaging. When you think about packaging in even developed countries, you will see a lot of women work in those kind of jobs. And I'm not saying specifically that's where they should work, but there are other areas downstream in the process where women can work and can earn a bit more than working in the field. Bear in mind, the field laborer in Africa earns 75 cents a day. So that will not even feed himself, let alone feeding their family. When we took over the farm, we had access to the employees, the farm laborers, earning $40 a month, 6 days work, 10 hours a day, $40. You go out and you go to the supermarket and you can't even buy $40 in African supermarket for breakfast. That's the fact. So getting people, women, giving tools that will make their life easier in the agriculture is a must.
It's terrific, constantly innovating.
Just very quickly, food waste, perishable foods is a huge issue. I've seen cans of milk set along the side of a road waiting to be picked up in the hot summer sun for hours. And by the time it gets to the collection point, where it probably will not be pasteurized, it's full of insects that are carrying disease. Other foods that are not stored properly, and I agree that's a huge issue, they become contaminated with aflatoxins and mycotoxins, and we now know that both of those materials are important causes or promoters of poor health in many of these countries. On the women's empowerment side, all of our programs that we deliver are to women in Africa, whether it's technical training or microfinance, advisement. That's been our main focus, and I'd say most universities are focusing on women in agriculture now. It does make me worry about the boys and the men in the country and what are they doing. And I think probably most of us suspect that remains a point of contention and lack of civil society in the future, but that's a whole nother different issue.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take some questions from the floor. So why don't I take a couple questions from over here, we'll answer those, and then I'll come over here to the right. So let's go this way.
Hi, Chris Brown with the World Affairs Council, and my question is, how do you measure the metrics around the partnerships for business, government, NGOs? How do you, for your shareholders or for in any sort of way, how do you measure those metrics?
The measurement is the success on the ground. When we work for civil society, we're not expecting return of that investment. It's not that is not it's in kind, but we have to understand the roles that private sector plays and the civil society expertise. They have a lot of strength, the civil society, organized community, really understanding at the resources that for example, take care. The resources in Africa is tremendous. So we, as a private sector, we can't really invest a lot of resources. It will not justify for us some type of jobs to hire full-time employees. Where we see the benefit is for working very closely with the civil societies, is that sharing the objective of the civil society to change the poverty and hunger for the local community, and we can play a role that will help us to put in our resources that can help the local community from 3 years down the road to stand their own feet. So we have the tools that can help them to improve their productivity. But we don't have the resources to go out and really fragmented community to deal with each of them separately. So what organizations, civil society organizations, NGOs does, they build the communities already. They have organized these communities in cooperatives. So it's easier for private sector to really deal directly with an NGO, the community that they've already organized.
And I think just to add to that for a minute, I think you heard John Rice talk about how countries have plans. I think partnerships have to have plans too. So being very clear, what's the objective of each partner in that partnership? What are they trying to accomplish? And then measuring and tracking that and reporting it out. Many companies like yourselves have sustainability reports or business reports. And so as a civil society comes together and says, well, I want you to solve the fact that for every 3 pieces of fruit, 2 are being rejected on my farm, so what do I do? And business might be saying, well, I don't want that fruit to be rejected because I need that for the juice that I'm making. And then the government says, well, I want to make sure that they're paying their taxes. And I'm making this example up in general terms, but being very clear, I think, to your point around what is everyone trying to get out of the partnership, and can they deliver through either their skills or financial resources or whatever the case may be. Let's go to the next question, then we'll keep going back and forth.
Yeah, farming is both business and home. And so I guess my question more focuses on the home and the family farm. And what are your thoughts on the public health priorities and agenda for Africa as it comes to families living on farms? And how to think about connecting agriculture to health to improve the health of family farms.
Have Dean Engel take that question.
I think there's no doubt that the family farm, maybe even the backyard garden, is going to continue to be important within many countries of the continent. That's as much social as anything else. Many people, I'll give you a good example. Poultry grown in a vertically integrated grow-out house in Africa is not generally preferred to the backyard chickens. Backyard chickens eat bugs and plant material. And if any of you have ever had free-range chicken, you do know that it has a different flavor. And so I don't ever see that going away. It raises a whole level of different challenges for agricultural production, and will always be used to offset some of the expenses with needed income for those small farms. But nonetheless, there is still a need for more organized, I hate to use this term because it's got all kinds of negative connotations with it, but organized industrial agriculture because of the efficiency of scale that you see at that level. And so we are going to see that move in that direction. But I would also say most people, probably many people in this room, still believe that growing your own food, eating, processing, cooking what you have produced may be safer because you understand what chemicals or what pathogens may be in your backyard garden plot. There's psychological well-being that goes along with it as well, and that's always important. So there is a feeling that there are better health outcomes when you grow some of your own food. I don't know that there's any data to support that, but I personally think, from having spent lots of time in Africa, that these backyard gardens are always going to be important for health, income, and as much a cultural reason.
Right. Let's take some questions from over here.
Thanks very much. Frank Richards from the Carter Center. Two quick questions, or two question areas. One, talk a little bit from the laudable goal of food security to the issues of cash crops, tea plantations, cotton, coffee, sugar. And related to that, just the important health problem of migrant workers. We have that in this country, people moving to pick citrus fruits, et cetera, who are outside of the health system, outside of the general system. And that is not uncommon in lots of parts of Africa and can lead to a lot of communal disputes. So I'm very interested in what you're seeing that with some of your development efforts. Thanks.
Would like to take that.
I think that I'm more expert in the row cropping than fruit and vegetable. Maybe this is for Coca-Cola. I think you're in this segment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one thing that you reference here around, you know, food security, it's a critical issue for the world that everyone faces. I think that's, you know, I even like the way it starts with health system security, the way Dr. Frieden started. We need to make sure that as the world population grows, there are enough resources to feed the world, which means that the whole system has created everything from the conversation we just had here, which might be a little controversial around organized industrial agriculture, to, you know, farming in your backyard, all the way to the discussion around food waste. So how do you ensure that the resources are there to feed the world's population? We also know that being in business at Coca-Cola, we're purchasing agricultural ingredients. It's really important to the sustainability of our business, just as water is, and just as having thriving communities. So we see a direct link in empowering people to manage and own their businesses, generate revenue, have jobs, and benefit from the agricultural initiatives and innovation that's taking place, while at the same time we're putting back into the community from the items that we buy. So I don't know if I've answered all the questions. I'm not an expert on migrant labor workers, and I'd have to get someone from my office to follow up on that question, but I don't know if the dean would have an academic perspective as well.
Well, food safety is always a big elephant in the room. You will never be able to export food to another country if other countries are worried about the safety of the products that you are exporting. So that's something that, if that's the intent, to develop an export market, there is no option other than to put in place strong policies and strong programs to ensure the integrity of the food. And often that means moving in the direction away from backyard agriculture to something that is more organized, where you can control all the critical points of the process.
Let's go to another question.
Ravi Jayakran from MAP International. MAP International focuses on making essential medicines available, preventing disease and disasters, and promoting health. And 50%, we have an integrated program called the Total Health Village. So 50% of what we do is about food security. And so this is music to our ears when you talk about the link between food security and health. But part of what we do is engage intensively with communities so that we are engaging on all the problems that the community faces. Though the entry point may be one specific area, but we address all of the issues. And so what you said just is like music to our ears. So one of the things we're trying to do is engage in public sector as well as other partnerships to get opportunities for the corporate sector to engage with some of these total health villages. So you could bring in more technology, because the next step now is how do we improve the value of the food that is produced? Because you produce a lot of carrots and other vegetables. How do we value add to that? So this is where we're looking for those kind of partnerships. So
Thank you.
more a comment than a question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's take one more from here, and then we'll come over here.
Hi, in terms of job creation, we really don't need a rocket science to create jobs in Africa. One of the biggest problems we have is that we don't add value to our raw materials. So when you take, there is so much someone can spend in food. If a farmer produces plantain, I will not spend $10,000 in plantain. However, if that farmer is able to fry that plantain, create ice cream out of that plantain, you know, for every value you add on that raw material, you create more jobs. perhaps this is a model that Coca-Cola, Care International, I know you are non-for-profit, but you could twist your business system just a little bit. I would offer my service for free for that. You could twist it just a little bit and be able to create a system that would allow people not just to work, because in Africa, yes, we don't have problem with food. We don't have problem. The only problem we have is logistic and value added. Yeah. And the more people work, the more Coke they will be able to buy, and the better off is Coca-Cola and many other companies. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you very much. Just make a comment on that. When you look at now developed countries, when you go out supermarket trying to buy food, you look at the label, where did that food come from? There is a trend now in Europe as well as in the US, traceability, knowing where is that food grown. Everyone wants to have that food growing in their neighborhood. Nobody wants to buy a food is growing from 100 kilometers and flowing in. So fixing in the African agriculture requires also to think about, within 100-kilometer ratio, I can produce everything vertically integrated. So and consume within that type of promoting of agriculture. Really producing locally and eat local, promoting locally produced food. That would really create jobs within the villages, in small cities in Africa. That will really create additional jobs. Please go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. My name is Allison Brooks. I'm a GIS mapping intern with the Task Force for Global Health. But since this conversation is about sustainability, one thing I'm not really hearing is the global ecological piece of the sustainability. So when we're talking about making sure that the environment that supports health, and if you have access to water, but if you have pesticides leaching into your water supply, like we do in the United States in some areas, how do we really address these issues? So my question is, how are we incorporating the larger environmental conversation into our talks, and specifically talking about the issues with like mangrove forests in kind of Thailand and other areas, and then the backlash with the tsunami because they didn't have the mangrove forests available to protect them from that. And so there's just been a lot of instances where we've kind of put economic sustainability before kind of environmental sustainability, and then it bites us at a later point in time. So how are we thinking about that in the forefront? Thank you.
Both of our panels answer that question.
When you take our project in Zambia, I have my colleagues here for sustainability, and we're really looking at how to really produce food in a sustainable way, most cost-effective way. The cost-effective way is really to look at the best practice that is available now in the US or in Brazil. One of them is no-till. Which means, you don't have to plow, go back and forward with your equipment in the soil, that you can actually go into control traffic, which limits the amount of time you have to drive to the field. And the second one, what we're trying to implement is really to look at in the pesticide usage. And one of the shocking part of it, when we did our research in Africa, the farmers couldn't tell us their pesticide consumption, fertilizer consumption. They couldn't tell us how much they use. So now we're building it in precision farming. So precision farming allows you to really track what you're using in the farm per hectare. Really, maybe you can add to that, the dean can add to that, but really knowing what you're consuming is quite important. And for us, if we can get that traceability, then we can set up goals to reduce annually the consumption of pesticide, consumption of fertilizer. We can then start really working on the soil and fixing the soil that it will produce with the less chemicals required. The biggest challenge in Africa in general, in the farming, is the land clearance. It's a bush continent. And clearing the bush, especially when you take like countries like Nigeria, which is in the southern part of Nigeria, it's very potential country for agriculture, but it could cost you $4,000, $3,000 per hectare to clear the land. But what we are now thinking about, and we're trying to test some product in our farm, is how can we use while we're clearing the land, how can we use that material to produce energy? So using biofuel. creating something added value, just while you're doing one element. So we're looking the whole value chain, how can we get the best out of what we do in the whole process. These are something that we're working on in our side, really, in terms of environmental awareness.
Let's hear what Dean Engel has to say as well.
And I don't particularly agree with the premise that agriculture is not sustainable. It is a continuum, and there certainly is non-sustainable agriculture. There is very, very sustainable agriculture, and most of the rest of us are somewhere in the middle. But the goal of agriculture is to become more sustainable. We've got to accept the fact that we have to produce food to feed a growing world. And that's going to take inputs. That takes chemicals, either pesticides or fertilizers. We are trying to use fewer pesticides and fewer fertilizers using many of these precision management systems that you have talked about. There's an economic incentive for the farmer to use fewer pesticides. So the burden is primarily on the farmer to minimize inputs. Farmers are all ecologists. They understand the impact of their operation on the environment better than anyone else because they live it every day. And so they also have an inherent desire to keep the environment as clean as possible. So sure, not everything is the way we would like it right now. We have problems in agriculture, but we have come light years from the days when we were putting on 4 or 5 times more nitrogen fertilizer on corn than we needed, and we were spraying DDT to control many of our insect pests. Many of our pesticides today have very low toxicity, and we're putting on no more nitrogen or potassium fertilizer than is needed anymore. And 10 years, 20 years, 50 years from now, we'll be doing even better.
We're going to take these last 3 questions, and then we'll do a wrap-up. So let's go ahead and do the 2 here, and then we'll come back to this mic, and then we'll do the wrap-up.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Major. I'm an MBA student at Georgia Tech with the Center for Business Strategies for Sustainability. This morning we heard about some of the biggest challenges in global health, which included conflict in fragile states and infrastructure issues. So my question is, how do you choose, prioritize, and even balance the communities that you serve? And especially with the idea of vertical integration and making those connections. Sometimes the communities in most need are the hardest to reach, especially that last mile. Thank you.
Let's get a quick answer from you, and then we'll go to the next question, then there.
That's a very good question. And I mentioned last night, if you look at Africa, it's 54 countries, and you mentioned many countries will fit in, even if you include India, so will fit in a map. And when you look at where the issues are, it's maybe 10-20% of the landmass. Where are the critical issues? Take my home country, Somalia. Take like Central Africa. Take, for example, a small part of northern Nigeria. So you find where the conflicts are is very limited. So as we operate in Africa from different grouping in the east, west, and south, we really look at most difficult place to reach. Like, for example, we went to Zambia. Many people said, why do you go to Zambia? It's a landlocked country. And we've said, no, it's a land-linked country. So there's 8 countries neighboring to Zambia. So if you're getting your goods from Durban, you can get goods from Dar es Salaam, you can get Durban, Windhoek from Namibia. So fixing that supply chain help us also to address, in one go, we can address the whole southern part of Africa. So strategically, we go most challenging part. So we start a difficult part and work backwards. So that will give us also good overview the cost of logistics. And then it's very, very costly to really operate some of these remote areas.
My name is Claudius Johannes, and I have a few questions. I traveled back and forth to Africa several times. There are certain things I don't understand when it comes to agricultural product. The technology has made a great impact in producing agricultural products, but most of those products are exported, and which created shortage in the country, which made it expensive for the locals to buy. If we're talking about also as agriculture, not only feeding the people, also as agro-business, then how is it when a local farmer cannot produce and sell it in the local community? Because if I can go to one African country, I find foreign aid products for cheaper. So that discourages farmers from producing products, selling in the local community. So we're talking about sustainability. So if we are doing two different things, how is that sustainable?
Okay. We're also going to take this question before they answer. So let's go ahead and take this question.
Thank you. My name is Benson Nsonwara. Thank you so much, panelists, for all the information. It's been very enlightening. My question relates to the participation of the public sector in agriculture in Africa. Like you said earlier on, one of the panelists talked about Gabon that has, I think, 92% of their food coming in from importation, and eventually the government had to, redirect their policy and do something about that. There's also the issue that there are kind of mechanized farming projects in certain countries that are wired towards exporting, produce for factories in other countries. They have different situations in different parts of Africa. In Nigeria, for instance, you don't see as much importation of food, but the food is produced by local farmers, and it's self-sustaining for the individuals that sell in the markets and for the population to feed, but it doesn't really do enough as far as producing large volume that will really bring down the price of the food. And then they also have to be careful because eventually when they produce, like I think the panelists in the middle said earlier on, a lot of the food is lost to waste. So you have issues with mechanized farming. I mean, we know that the rest of the world, America, Europe has adopted technology to farming for years, in fact, decades. And this is basically lacking on the African continent. You have issues with preservation. You have issues with storage and processing. So my question is, what are I know that, when government or the public sector gets involved, in directing policy, it has a big influence on changing the landscape. Because truth be told, there is only so much that, foreigners or foreign institutions, and foreign organizations can do in terms of coming in and helping to develop the system. They don't live there. They come in, they help, and then they go. They send their expatriates or their people, they go in there, and then they leave. The point is, how do we creatively, I don't know, I don't have any ideas myself, and that's why I'm asking the question. How do we get the leaders, the governments in Africa to become interested, to become passionate about food sustainability in Africa, in paying attention to mechanized farming, in paying attention to preservation, in paying attention to storage, because foreign institutions can come and do so much, but they'll leave eventually. How do you empower, how do you creatively get the leaders involved in food sustainability in Africa? Because with best intentions, private institutions, foreign institutions, at the end of the day, they'll increase the food production 20%. But when the government gets involved, then the landscape will change. So what can we do in terms of getting the government involved in food sustainability in Africa? That's my question.
So those were two very big questions. In the spirit of time, my panelists are going to have to answer those questions very briefly. So why don't we just each take one, pick whichever one you want, and then you get the next one.
Yeah, let me take that question. Think about it. In Africa, graduate students today, all university, the schools, less than 2% studies agriculture. 70% of African livelihood depends on agriculture. So it's a huge mismatch. If I look at just the private clients that we have, for just now putting in my hat as a, just thinking about the business, the profit side of it, the private sector that we have today, the opportunities, the plans they have to grow, we need 3,000 employees before 2020. And there's no way we can find those 3,000 employees in Africa. What is missing in Africa is the middle management. We have a lot of, Ivy League, highly educated people, and we have a very low skilled labor. And we need to find a middle management that can manage a farm. that can really drive the business and make it profitable. That's one of the biggest challenge we've seen in Africa. So I'll take away from your side is if you're African and you have kids and they're now going to study, please send them to go to study in agriculture, because that's where the benefit will be in Africa in the long term. We're 1 billion people. And I always say that people have to eat. What other business do you have to go in? You know, oil or forget about it, law or other areas. People have to eat 3 times a day. There is the huge opportunity to feed our people in Africa. You know, I come from Somalia. The biggest city in Somalia is a refugee camp in the border of Kenya. So my vision is to fix this problem. 23 years ago, I was one of them. So I came here today, traveled a long distance to take this opportunity to really, if you have a kid in Africa and you have a kid at home, please send them to study in agriculture. Because we don't have, just putting in the private side, we don't have enough resource to execute the projects that the private sector have for Africa to grow food. That's a big challenge. The second one, when we talked about a lot of the government, you know, I find very strange, when you visit the Ministry of Agriculture, I visit many of ministers, you get picked up the most nicest car, BMW, you know, Mercedes, you know, 4-wheel drive Jeep. And then you go to his office and says, I want to buy the cheapest mechanical tractor you have. I said, why? You are driving BMW. Why don't you buy BMW of agriculture so you can farm? Sell the BMW, buy the high-tech of equipment. That's a challenge. You know, the minister would like to drive, you know, Royal Royce, but when it comes to agriculture, he says, I want it made in China or made in India. Think about it. 60% of the products sold in Africa, agricultural mechanization, come from India. So which is very small, very minimum. You know, we call it here in the US, maybe you don't know it, hobby farmers. You know, people who have, you know, 2 horses, they use this equipment. And we're trying Africa to buy this equipment to feed ourselves. That's so some education needs to happen in the government side. We need to educate the Minister of Ag to stay out of agriculture and really focus on enabling, putting in policies in place that will bring more foreign direct investment into Africa. I'm adding on my closing remarks. Okay, so I'll combine these two. You know, if I segment for you in African agriculture, you know, demographics, 10% are professional farmers. 25% are emerging farmers. They have a little bit capital. They can get access to $5,000 to $8,000 to the finance from the bank. It doesn't allow them to really grow fast. And then you have a 65% is family farmers. You know, and that segment is non-bankable. You know, so we have to find a balance between increasing the professional farmers up to 30%. That will make it healthy in the system, and have more emerging or more small, medium family farmers move into the emerging side, so that we can have 30%, 40% in 5-10 years. We can achieve that as long as we address all those 3 areas at the same time. Holistic approach, scientific approach, address the whole problem issue in one go. We can finish hunger in Africa.
Let's take a minute.
So the legislators of the state of Georgia are always asking me, why am I going to South America or to Africa to teach others how to grow more food when, in fact, we should be growing that food here and then selling it to those people, keep that economic development here. It's obviously a very short-sighted approach, but sometimes that happens with politicians. The big elephant in the room here from a U.S. perspective is our farm policy and its impacts on food production in Africa. I don't want to talk about my opinion of that, but whether it's direct food aid that can be undercutting the price of food grown in Africa, or our ability from this country to sell food cheaper than you can grow it in Africa, that is having a tremendous impact on the ability of farming and farmers to expand their operations on that continent. Our farm bill, which is, we will have a new farm bill relatively shortly, it will address some of those issues. There is an understanding that it's had a huge impact on many lesser developed countries, but it by no means gets us to the point where these countries are going to be able to flourish. And so we're going to need a few more farm bills before I think we get to a point where many of these problems are solved.
So with that, I want to thank our terrific panelists, Dean Scott Angle from UGA. We have Noureddin Osman here, the head of AGCO in Africa as well as Middle East. So thank you very much for your thoughtful remarks.